You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built for us.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. First of all, I forgot that once in a while, if I add music to the intro, it kind of changes some of the settings and it makes my voice sound all crazy. And I didn't catch it because I didn't have to go back and listen or edit anything. I just kept on rocking and rolling, and so it kind of got a little jacked up. So if that happens once in a while, my bad. But today what I wanted to do was to kind of open things up a little bit. I asked some questions on Patreon, on Facebook, on Twitter, and wanted to just kind of see what was out there, what people were thinking, because if you couldn't tell by the couple short episodes I've had, I'm kind of spinning my wheels a little bit here. And even when I do find something that I think will be kind of interesting, I spend, several hours working on the math and all that stuff, and it takes me 10 minutes to say it, and I don't know how to expand on it. So it's like, dang it, I was hoping that would be a full episode. It took me 10 minutes, and I got nothing else. So I try to take pride in the fact that I do pretty well in the off season. I usually can come up with some stuff, and I'm spinning my tires here, folks. And I don't want to just keep ragging on the Bears. I can. We could just make this a make fun of the Bears, Lions, and Vikings podcast. But hopefully we got more OTAs coming up this week, so hopefully we'll have a little bit more news and we can kind of play off that a touch. But anyways, like I said, I reached out, and feel free to put stuff in there. I'm going to try to remember to do that more often. I know Sunday at like 8 o'clock or whenever I posted it is probably not when I'm going to catch the most eyeballs, but I wanted to get it out there. So make sure you're in the Facebook group. Make sure you're following me on the Twitters, pack_daddy, and or if you're on Patreon, love to hear from you. But anyways, why don't we get started with Brucey Bruce. Bruce. Says, seems like the offensive line has a lot to prove this year. How do you see the offensive line shaking out? Well, I've kind of settled down to two different options. There's obviously a lot more than that, but I mean, we can pretty much write in pen that Zach Tom's going to be the right tackle. I don't think Josh Myers loses the center job, and I tend to think Elton Jenkins stays right where he is. So really it all comes down to Jordan Morgan. Now, to me, best five means you just take Jordan Morgan, you put him at right guard to replace John Runyon, you call it a day. Simple enough. But I genuinely believe the Packers want and expect Jordan Morgan to be the left tackle. Which is great if Jordan Morgan can be a great right tackle, right? That's a very important thing. The problem is we're taking a starter and putting him on the bench and putting a non-starter at right guard. When we could have 5 starters, we're going to have 4. But we'll see. We've got Monk in there. We've got Sean Ryan to prove that he can step up this year and actually be a solid right guard, which is entirely possible. Not likely, but possible. But we got to see. It's also entirely possible that Jordan Morgan maybe just isn't ready for the left tackle role, and he legitimately loses the job to Rasheed Walker, at which point maybe he does end up winning the right guard job. Or, they have to start shuffling some stuff around. Maybe they put Elton on the right side, whatever. Figure it out. But as it stands today, it would be Jordan Morgan, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom. I think, would be the offensive line. But again, as these OTAs continue and whatnot, we'll get a little bit more information. We'll see how they start shaking things up. We didn't get much. I think they had 3 days of OTAs, and we saw one of them. So we'll see. Next question comes by way of Chris Edwardson. He says, can we deep dive into how good Vegas is at predicting season success, thinking over-under season win totals, and how close they are at their preseason numbers, and also specifically the Packers? So as it stands right now, if you go over to, I mean, obviously there's no complete unanimous, but everything's pretty close. The Ravens, 49ers, and Chiefs are sitting at 11.5 wins. Cowboys, Eagles, Lions, Bengals, Bills are at 10.5. The Jets, Dolphins, Packers, Texans, Falcons are at 9.5. The Bears, Colts, Browns, Jaguars, Rams, Chargers, Steelers are at 8.5. The Buccaneers, Saints, Vikings, Seahawks are at 7.5. Giants, Raiders, Titans, Cardinals, Commanders at 6.5. And then Panthers at 5.5, Patriots at 4.5. That comes specifically from DraftKings, but again, it's pretty much in line with what everybody else has. So the question is, how reliable is that? So I went back and just looked at the last 2 years. I don't want to read off everything because it would be, 64 different, things. But it's in alphabetical order, so let's just look at a couple here. You got the Cardinals, where their win projection number was at 9, they won 4. Falcons, 5, they won 7. Ravens were close, 9.5, and it was 10. Buffalo, 11.5, they got 13. Chicago Bears at 6, they won 3. Bengals, 9.5, 12. Broncos 10-5. Some of the Packers specifically were projected to win 11 in 2022. They won 8. They were projected to win 6.5 in 2023. They won 9. So pretty big swing and a miss on both of those. I mean, the numbers don't seem super far apart, but an 11-win team compared to an 8-win team is a pretty big difference. And a 6-win team and a 9-win team, pretty different as well. Colts were real bad in 2022. They were projected 10. They got 4. So anyways, I wanted to take these numbers and try to figure out how accurate they are. And I was actually surprised to find out how really, really mathematically inaccurate they are. I just ran a correlation. Simple enough, right? You got the two numbers, you run a correlation between the two and see how well or how closely they correlate. The correlation, just to be clear, a correlation of 1, it runs between 1 and -1. A 1 is a perfect correlation, 0 is no correlation, and a -1 is perfectly inverse, right? For 2022, the correlation is approximately 0.39. For 2023, the correlation is approximately 0.15. Then I had my robot help me out, and it ran a linear regression analysis. It says this will help us understand the relationship between the projected wins and actual wins, including how much of the variance in actual wins can be explained by the projected wins. And then it goes on to explain R-squared value. The value will tell us the proportion of the variance in the actual wins that is predictable from the projected wins. So how much does the 2022 prediction explain what happened in 2022? Well, in 2022, the R-squared value is approximately 0.15. For 2023, the R-squared value is approximately 0.02. So it goes on interpretation. For 2022, the R-squared value of 0.15 indicates that about 15% of the variance in the actual wins can be explained by the win projection. So in other words, compared to just random guessing, compared to just throwing the dice out there and just randomly picking a number, 15% of the variance in the wins can be explained by the projections. This suggests a weak predictive power. In 2023, the R-squared value of 0.02 indicates that only about 2% of the variance in the actual wins can be explained by the win projection, suggesting a very weak predictive power. So I pushed it a little bit further. I said, all right, let's try to, I really want to quantify this a little bit, right? Let's say the Packers are projected to get 9.5 wins, which they are. How can we take this level of predictive power and apply it to the 2024 season to kind of see what we're talking about here? So if you use the 2022 regression model, and in other words, take the, the 15% or 0.15 of the R-squared value, and you say, this is how accurate it is. Let's put it that way. The 0.15 indicates how accurate this 9.5 number is. Now, explain to me what the variance is based on this, how strong the predictive power is, to give me a range of possible wins. And based on the incredible predictive power that is the Vegas machine, we can now mathematically predict that the Packers will win between 3.5 and 14.5 games. In other words, it's not predicting jack squat. Pretty much anything is possible. And if we use the unbelievably incredible predictive power of the 2023 season, you go to the low end, which is 3.4 wins, and the high end, which is 15.6 wins. So between, 3 and 16 wins on the season is roughly what you can expect based on Vegas saying 9.5 wins. Now, another way to look at this, when you look at the individual teams and how accurate they are, so in other words, the difference between projected and actual, and then find the average, Vegas is off by about 2.5 games on average. That happened in both years, actually. It was off by less in 2023, actually. Not surprisingly, it doubled over 2 years. So in total, for each team over 2 years, Vegas was off by about 4.5 games. And if you look on if you look over 2 years where Vegas has been the most correct, the two teams they've been most correct about are the Buffalo Bills and the New Orleans Saints. They've been off by 2 games over 2 years. The Packers over 2 years, they've been off by 5.5. So that's the 10th most. So if you divide that by 2, they're off by roughly 3 games-ish. But even if you call it 2, you're talking, 11.5 to 6.5 is kind of the range. Well, duh. In reality, I think, an average football fan sitting down guessing about as good a chance as at getting a lot of these right. In 2022, if you look at how many teams they were right about in terms of coming within 0.5 point, the Patriots, Dolphins, Commanders, Ravens, Panthers, Chargers, so 6 teams, which, I don't know, maybe doesn't seem terrible, but it's not great. If you want to know how many they were off by 3 wins or more, it was 12 teams. 2023 was a little bit better. They had 10 within 0.5 point. 8 were 3 wins or more that they were off by. So to quantify that, we're talking the 49ers were projected to win 9. They ended up winning 12. The Ravens, 9.5. They won 13. So bottom line, if you couldn't tell, not super predictive. You expect Vegas to be off by 2 to 3 wins, and when you look at the span of that, you kind of go, yeah, duh. I don't even really need to see the schedule to know that that's kind of the range. But anyways, really appreciate the question. Why don't we take our first break, and we'll be right back. We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built-for-us.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Jewelry isn't a gift you give just once. It's a way to remind your loved one of a beautiful moment every time they see it. Blue Nile can help you find the gift that says how you feel and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com to find the perfect jewelry gift for any occasion. BlueNile.com.
You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
Yeah, another question here. This one from Browen over on the Patreons. He says, more of an extension of a previous podcast. If an offense or defense ended the year in decline historically, should we expect them to start the next year in poor form? So, I did look into it quite a bit. I didn't do it nearly as extensively as I could have, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to take a small sample. I tried DVOA, but they're trying to redo their whole site. They don't have any historic stuff, at least nothing that's easy to access. So I went to PFF, and I didn't do offense or defense. I mean, the question at hand, at least in the previous podcast, was, Packers ascending, Detroit descending. And so I thought it was a fair question, right? Because I made the point that the Packers were getting better and the Lions were getting worse, but it still leaves the question, so what? Does that have any bearing on next year? So kind of random, but PFF was open for me to 2017, so I was like, all right, fine, let's do 2017. I did about half the league here, alphabetical order through Green Bay. So Arizona, Atlanta, Baltimore, Buffalo, Carolina, Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, and Green Bay. And I put out all their PFF grades by week, and then I looked at the slope. In other words, did they improve, did they get worse, etc. Then I looked at their 2017 and 2018 records, and I looked at the difference. So, for example, Baltimore was at 0.4 in terms of their slope, so they improved the most of any team. In 2017, they had a record of 9. In 2018, they had a record of 10, which is an increase of 1. So if you go through it, Baltimore had an increase of 1, Cleveland had an increase of 7, Arizona had a decrease of 5, on and on and on. You compare that to their slopes to see if the increase or decrease has any correlation to the increase or decrease of their record next year. And the correlation came in at a 0.4, which is actually relatively high. I mean, remember, Vegas was like a 0.13 or something, or possibly, I think the highest one was like 0.3, maybe. I don't remember, but it wasn't this high. And the point is, I think if you really looked into it, you could get this number up quite a bit. For example, let's say you had a team that lost their quarterback halfway through the season. Well, they're going to have a high record that becomes a low record. So their trajectory is going to plummet, but then their record is going to skyrocket next year. So if you went in and actually adjusted for all those kinds of things to get a proper look at this, I think you can get this number up quite a bit. So being 0.4, just kind of randomly throwing this in there, I would say that there is some level of correlation to this. Some of the examples, Baltimore is one of them. Their record went up as they were ascending. You had Cleveland. I mean, this was kind of an obvious one, but they were ascending the second most of any team. They had 0 wins in 2017 and had 7 in 2018. Dallas was ascending. They went from 9 to 10. Then you had Carolina was descending. They went from 11 to 7. Cincinnati was descending. They went from 7 to 6. Detroit was descending. They went from 9 to 6. Buffalo was descending. They went from 9 to 6. Green Bay was descending. They went from 7 to 6. And Atlanta was descending the most. They went from 10 to 7. Honestly, almost every single one of these lines up. The only ones that do not would be Chicago. They were descending. They went from 5 to 12. And then Denver was descending. They went from 5 to 6. So only 2 teams out of the, 12 that we have went the other direction. Of the 4 teams that were ascending, 3 of them increased their record. Of the 8 teams that were descending, 2 of them increased their record. And one of them was only by 1 game. Now, unfortunately, when you look at the PFF grade slope for the Detroit Lions, it's kind of minor. Maybe if you look at DVOA, it would be bigger. Actually, let me look at DVOA real quick, because I do have that for 2023. Well, that probably doesn't work because I created the variable based on PFF, but whatever. It ends up being kind of minor because PFF didn't downgrade them to the same degree as DVOA did. But still, I would love to do it with DVOA. If somebody can get me some historical DVOA stuff, I'll do this again. But the bottom line is there is a correlation between decreasing teams having their records go down and increasing teams having their records go up. Detroit did go down. Green Bay did go up. So we'll see what happens. Let me just do it with DVOA just for fun. Hopefully it gives us a bigger number here. Not really. They lose one game, whatever. But I appreciate the question because I do like looking into that stuff, and I do like having people ask those simple questions, right? The Packers were getting better, the Lions were getting worse. So what? Does it mean anything? Again, the answer seems to be yes, based on a very small sample size on a 2017 to 2018 season. If I had more time and a simpler way of doing it, like if I just had DVOA as opposed to PFF where I have to take each individual season and copy and paste and translate that and everything else, it's a pain. I would end up doing more, but appreciate the question. Craig has a few questions over here on the Patreons. One of them is, we seem to have lost some of the Lambeau home field advantage, even in the cold weather. When did this seem to turn? Is it a fact that we do better at home in cold weather against warm weather teams? How much has the wave or cheering loudly when we're on offense affected this? Just kidding. When we are on the road, what's our record in cold weather, warm weather, and domes? Well, in Matt LaFleur's tenure, the Green Bay Packers are 19-6 when the temperature is below 40 degrees, or I should say 40 and below. The Packers over that stretch on average are 5-point favorites. They on average win by 7.28, meaning they overperform in those games. Compared to normal, those are home games, just to be clear. The Packers are, so at home, regardless of temperature, 34-11. Point spread is about the same. It's 5.1, and the Packers win on average by 6.4. So they are very slightly better at home in the cold, I guess. And you said, when we're on the road, compare cold, warm, and domes. So on the road in the cold, since Matt LaFleur's tenure, the Packers are 5-4. They only have a spread of negative 1.7, which is to say that, and that's why it's important to look at that, because you don't expect to have as good of a record in games where you're averaging, you're expecting to win by a smaller margin. Probably a lot of this has to do with playoff games, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to figure out the math on that, but there you go. You said warm weather, so I'll say 70 or greater. Not a lot of those. Packers are 1-0 in those games. And in a dome, 7-5, which is also not super great. I did look for fun, just because I was kind of curious about it. I looked at the last 100 games the Packers played in the cold, 40 or below. Goes back to like 1998. And I did something kind of similar where I just looked at the slope. I looked at the trend line of the, I guess you could say, Packers win over expected. In other words, if the Packers are expected to win by 3 and they win by 4, then it would be a positive 1. Essentially, the slope is 0. That is to say, there really is no trend downward for the Packers. If we just look at the last 10 games, the Packers have lost 3. I believe that's at home in the cold we're talking about here. So I know I looked at this a lot in the past in a different way, and I could try to attack it from sort of a different angle at another time, but I looked at a whole bunch of, I don't want to say misconceptions, but most of them ended up being, but a lot of conceptions, and found that a lot of them were not true. That the Packers are no good at home anymore, which is not really true. The Packers aren't good in the cold, which isn't true. Packers can't handle the heat, which really wasn't true either. I think there's just some bad experiences that get stuck in our head, and I think with the cold weather, a lot of it really just comes down to the playoffs. Losing to Tampa or whatever the case may be. It's, you just automatically expect to win those games because it's cold in Green Bay, whatever, and it didn't go that way, and it just kind of leaves a bad, bitter taste in our mouth. I'm assuming anyways. But no, the Packers usually handle their business in the cold, especially at home. But Tough games are tough games. Doesn't matter where you're playing. Anyways, why don't we take a break? Craig's got a couple more questions. I don't think I'm going to attack one of them. It's just a little too much. I've already done like 3 research projects today. So that one's going to have to wait. But we'll come back and look at that. And then there's one other thing I wanted to touch on real quick. We'll be right back.
Have you ever experienced turbulence on a flight and wondered why?
And you can see all the terrain around you. You've got no issue with visibility or anything?
No, everything's PG.
Maybe you've sat on the tarmac for hours wondering why your plane isn't moving.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
Listen in on the conversations between pilots and air traffic controllers on the Air Traffic Out of Control podcast.
510 Whiskey declaring an emergency. There's smoke in the cabin. I need to make a landing right now on 31 left.
We have the most interesting, wild, and funny ATC recordings you will ever hear. Check out Air Traffic Out of Control wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Craig, again, over on Patreon. By the way, patreon.com/pack_daddy is where you can support this podcast. If you'd like to, you can do so for as little as $1 a month. Craig says, heaven forbid Jordan Love suffered a season-ending injury in preseason. Do you think they would go with one of the current backups, Pratt or Clifford, or try to find a veteran? If we do go the veteran route, who out there is available, and who would you take? Well, my preference is always not everybody's favorite preference. My preference is you go with Pratt or Clifford, and you keep your fingers crossed that they do a terrible job. Because if the season's over anyways, let's set ourselves up for success and get some of those studs that we never would have had an opportunity to get otherwise, you know? If you are a top 5 team in the league and can end up with a top 5 pick, the best of both worlds. But I know that's not how really anybody thinks, including the Packers, who are going to try to find a way to win. I do think Pratt or Clifford will be up first. They're going to try that. Whoever it is that they determine was more ready will sail in with them, and the other one will go on practice squad, and the one that's sitting as the number 2 backup will be the one that'll get an opportunity to go win some football games. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer here, depending on, unless the guy just wants $1 billion, but not a lot of guys out there. There's Garrett Gilbert, who I've never heard of, Ben DiNucci, give me a break, Felipe Franks, yeah, right, Logan Woodside, no, Trevor Siemian, no, Matt Barkley, no, A.J. McCarron, no, Blaine Gabbert, yeah, right, Brian Hoyer, I don't think so, and Ryan Tannehill. And according to SpotTrack, his average annual salary, I don't know how they come up with this number, but it's $7.7 million. That's chump change. I mean, that is, for a quarterback, that's like giving a running back like $100,000. That is nothing. So yeah, I would want Ryan Tannehill out here to see what he could do for us. And again, I don't know that it's necessarily even a close call. Ryan Tannehill has shown that he has the ability at times in the right situation, etc., to be that guy. I don't know that anybody else really has. Maybe Hoyer for very brief stints, but you know, anything less than that, I'd rather just roll with the guys we have and see what happens. Let's have some fun with it and play with our own guys, you know? Why? Who wants to lose with freaking Brian Hoyer at quarterback? That's no fun. If we're going to lose, let's lose with Pratt, man. You know what I mean? Let's lose with Clifford. Let's do it. The other question that I will save for another date is, what percentage of the time in the past 10 years does a Packer player who signed a big contract live up to it versus falling way short of expectations? You can define big and way short. So, I mean, the hardest part is trying to collect that data as opposed to just individually going every single contract and then looking at, you know, that would take forever. If I can think of a fast way to do that, then I'll look into it. But getting you a percentage over 10 years, I would need just a repository somewhere where I could just grab that information. So I'll think it over. I'll see if I can think of a way to do that. I can't at the moment. Last thing I wanted to look at, JJ had sent this to me. I don't know if it was in response to me asking for help for content or just something he thought I'd find interesting. But there's a article from A to Z Sports written by our very own Wendell Ferreira. He says, do the Packers have enough blue chip talent to contend for a Super Bowl? He says, skipping down a little bit. Over the last 2 weeks, the Athletic Football Show had 2 episodes of exercises to discuss the best players in the league. Robert Mays was joined by Deontay Lee and Derek Clausen for a quarterbackless draft, and based on a 3-year window, a quarterback, so coming up is quarterbackless, quarterback draft based on 3-year window, Jordan Love was the 9th player taken. However, the second episode was a non-quarterback draft. There were 15 total choices, and no Packers players were selected, and not even considered. After the selections, the podcast discussed potential snubs, and the Packers players were not part of that either. Goes on to speculate about a few things. Rashawn Gary could theoretically be blue chip, but hasn't been elite. We used to have, in previous years, Adams, Bakhtiari, and Jair, but Adams and Bakhtiari are gone. Jair, injuries, et cetera, et cetera. So I have kind of a couple issues, and he sort of addresses it at the end here, but the first main issue that comes to my mind is we're approaching this with an all-or-nothing strategy. That is, either you have a quote-unquote blue chip or you have nothing. If we think about it in terms of do the Packers have a wide receiver 1? Let's just say, for argument's sake, we do not. Therefore, does that mean the Packers have bad wide receivers? No, I think the Packers have very good wide receivers, but they're all sort of second tier, and we have a bunch of second tier guys. Do I think Rashawn Gary, based on his play recently and mixing in injuries and everything else, do I think he belongs on the same tier as the top edge rushers? Probably not, no. Does Jair belong in a tier with, let's say Sauce Gardner or whatever? Probably not at this point in time, no. Based on the last 2 years. Does Zach Tom belong in the top tier? Probably not. Does Jordan Love deserve to be on the same tier as Pat Mahomes? Do I think he kind of played that way and you could argue it, but I would understand saying no based on the sample size that we have. Does Josh Jacobs belong in the top tier? Honestly, maybe, but last year was rough, so I guess I could understand not putting him in there. Does Xavier McKinney belong in there? I think he does, but if we're just not exactly going position by position, which would be another issue, we're just looking at the core position. I want, what did he say, 15 positions taken? I don't know if that's across all 3, which would mean 5 apiece. I don't really know. I started listening to it, but I didn't listen to the whole thing. Either way, if we're not including all the positions, and that becomes another issue. But overall, the first issue is, well, let me put it this way. The Green Bay Packers in the draft did not have a top 5 pick. They didn't have a top 10 pick, not a top 15, not a top 20. They picked at 25, I think it was? So you can assume from that the Packers have very little draft capital, when in reality, I think they had the 3rd or 4th most draft capital. Because although they didn't have the very top in the beginning, when you add up everything else, it came out to be one of the top. The other thing is the speculation, right? It's about judging in a way that I don't necessarily that I don't necessarily agree with. For example, one of the first guys taken, in fact, he was the 4th taken, is Patrick Surtain. Now, again, PFF is not the be-all, end-all. But Patrick Surtain wasn't even... Where was he? They had him 66th as far as his coverage grade goes. 66th. This is, I think, another situation where he was dominant in 2022. Everybody thinks he's still dominant, and so he remains at the top. I don't know why that happens to some people, but never Packers. Jair is obviously not still an elite guy, maybe because it was 2 years ago, I don't know. But he had a 66 grade as a rookie, then it was an 88, and then a 65. In fact, according to PFF, he had one good game, and it's funny because in the podcast, they talked about how he locked down Devontae Adams. It was unbelievable. That was the only game where he graded out good. His second highest graded game was against Kansas City. He had a 67.1 coverage grade. As far as his overall grades, he had one other game where he graded at a 70 or higher. It was against the Jets, and it was because of his run defense and tackling. So that's another issue. And on top of that, I can see all the players listed here, and there are 15 total. So to say that, there's only 15 blue chippers in the league and the Packers don't have any means almost nothing. Because the fact of the matter is, half the league doesn't have anybody on this list. In fact, hilariously enough, I don't think the Chiefs have anybody on this list. Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Justin Jefferson, Patrick Surtain, Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, Will Anderson, Sauce Gardner, Kyle Hamilton, Tristan Wirfs, A.J. Brown, Quinnen Williams, Max Crosby, Dexter Lawrence, and Nick Bosa. So I'm not super worried about it, to be completely honest with you. Now, would it be beneficial if we could get somebody back into that sort of, not even top 5 category, because top 5 doesn't even mean you're going to be in the top 15. You kind of have to be in the top 1 or 2, or maybe 3 if it's a deep group, be in this sort of top 15 category. But either way, would it be nice to have a guy that's arguably the best at the position again? Sure. Do I think it's a necessity and we're screwed if without it? No, because I think we were good enough to win the Super Bowl last year. And I think the only reason we didn't beat the 49ers and sail on to play the Chiefs is because we crapped our pants as usual in the postseason. It's not because we didn't have good enough players. It's that the players who are good enough didn't show up. It's the same story as every freaking year. And yes, this team was good enough to beat the Chiefs. They'd already done it. So, again, I will grant that it would be nice to kind of get a guy in that category again. I'm really not worried about it. Because if we can just do what we did last year and get Christian Watson back healthy and add Xavier McKinney and have, a couple contributors from this rookie class, I think we have a really good football team. In fact, take the exact same team and just up the defense because of our new DC, and I have no reservations about our ability to win the Super Bowl whatsoever. So, anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. You guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.